Hello everyone. Today I am going to review the next album of the Bee Gees. I've just finished all of their 60s albums from Barry Gibb, sings and plays 14 Bee Gees songs, right onto Odessa. Their next official release was their very first international compilation. So this makes it a very, very significant album called The Best of the Bee Gees, first of many, many records that they released that were basically mixtapes of their previous material. And this was like a German compilation that came out around the same time. Beautiful there. It's like Bee Gees, a bit of a depicted like a museum here. Really, really love that very much. And the cover art there is matched by this Brazilian 7-inch EP, which has, so I started a joke, words, Massachusetts and 1st of May on it. This is called Bee Gees' Biggest. I love it. It's a nice smaller version of that. And by the way, the best of The Who in France had the same artists portraying The Who. So with the same kind of artwork. It's very interesting. And then you got the liner notes there. And I've already reviewed all the songs, but I thought I'll revisit them again, especially now that I've just bought this new book called The Bee Gees in the 60s. I love it. Absolutely love this book. It's a must-have. Came out about a year ago, at the end of 2021. And there are some nice pictures there. Nice colour pictures you've never seen before. Aren't they gorgeous there? That's beautiful. And first song I want to bring your attention to is I Can't See Nobody. That was actually a B-side. For the first time I learned that that was actually written in the Australian period, their last tour before they went and jumped ship, so to speak, to go to England forever. They left Australia at the end of 1966, around November, and that's when they wrote the song. The song, there's a demo of it in their early, Australian recording sessions, but it's never surfaced. And they actually wrote it at a strip club. Because they were sharing a strip club at the time with for their act. Barry is quoting here, "It was written with Robin and I sitting together in a dressing room with girls who weren't wearing anything," if that's how you want to visualize it. So the comment, "I can't see nobody," it's pretty apt actually. You just have to change the way it's written. Being in the same dressing room with the dancing girls when they changed, you were still sitting there. Nobody bothered to say anything. Well, you know the fact that you are kids. It didn't cross their minds. But in our minds, we weren't kids. So yeah, there you go. That's a really interesting genesis of that, such a big song. That song, I think a lot of people would agree should have been a single, should have even been a hit, but it was only tucked away as a B-side. B-side of To Love Somebody. But what a single that to be behind. So that's really, really good. The song To Love Somebody also has been covered in recent years by Dexy's Midnight Runners, Kevin Rowland. And so that's really, really good because they were always very, very much Van Morrison sort of soul music based in the 80s. And it's good for them to go back further into the roots of soul music. My favourite song would happen to be Every Christian Lion-Hearted Man Will Show You. It's the second last track of the album. It's a real ode to the Beatles, Tomorrow Never Knows. It's their own sort of sojourn into Middle Eastern music, which is what that song was really fused with in the first place. A lot of people say, Bee Gees were tired of being a Beatles wannabe band, that's why they went to England, and that song doesn't help their case. Actually, I think that song really is a compliment to say it's like the Beatles, because I reckon they got the Beatles better than anyone else, if that's the case, because they went straight into the Middle Eastern component of that song and even do a chant in the Islamic kind of language. And just the feel of that with the mellotron, it's very haunting and it's very kind of like spooky. Gives you the sort of a sense of Middle East. Something foreign, something Middle Eastern, something really beautiful and different and unique. Just like the Beatles' Tomorrow Never Knows. All their great hits are reprised here, like Massachusetts Holiday, Gotta Get a Message to You, I Started a Joke. Great that they included Spicks and Specks as well. So later editions of this album helped the world to, wake up to that song and how good it is, because that song could have easily been covered up by the weight of history, because it was only done in their early Australian period. The liner notes here. The Bee Gees made their first UK stage appearance of 1967 when they joined Fats Domino and Jerry and the Pacemakers for a special week-long Easter holiday presentation at the Savile Theatre in London's West End. I think anyone who was anyone played at the Savile Theatre in those days. Anyway, the release of New York Mining Disaster 1941 in April really put the Bee Gees on the map, not only in Britain but also in the States. Leapfrogged up the charts. In Holland it was in the top 10 at the same time as Spicks and Specks, and it bounded in the charts in many other countries. Interestingly, there's no mention of the Beatles. Interesting. So obviously not everyone considered them to be a Beatlesque type of band at all. And when you look at other contenders who were around at the time, the Rolling Stones, the Hollies, Manfred Mann, of course, Klaus Voormann, who I mentioned before, was their artist on their first album, is from Manfred Mann. I forgot to mention that, but of course I love Manfred Mann, one of my favourite all-time bands. But when you look at all that cluster of bands, the Kinks, the Animals, they're all kind of Beatlesque, but the Bee Gees are probably the one that sticks out the most in a way, because they are, while they're British, inverted commas, they're quite different, employing mellotron and orchestration like it's nothing. Not like in the Beatles when they use it for dramatic effect. Here they're just using it in a very casual musical way. Just the way they do their harmonies and their arrangements, a lot of things, and Robin's ethereal voice, all these elements that make the Bee Gees unique. You can't overlook them. The cover designer here is actually credited, and it's Haig Adishian. And he did quite a lot of artwork of greatest hits material around that time, 1969 and 1970. So there you go. This was released in 1969, and this was released around the same time, and so was this one. In Brazil, in Germany. I think it's very cute, don't you think? Now this book covers every single recording in detail that they did in the 60s. So it's a real must-have. It's all in alphabetical order. So you just take it to the song. So let's just pick a song at random, and I'll pick out something interesting to read to you. So for example, what's a song I haven't really spoken about? I think it's a fascinating song actually. 1st of May. Let's look it up and see what it says here. Here we go. 1st of May. Despite 1st of May not being the preferred A-side choice, we know the story there. Just look at my video for Odessa. For all concerned, Robert Stickwood's decision to release it was validated when it became another international hit, charting in the top 10 across Europe and the UK and the top 20 in Canada and Australia. Morris recalled that when they were writing the song, Barry and I were sitting at the piano and I started playing the chords and Barry started singing, "When I was small and Christmas trees were tall." And I started singing along with it. We put a demo down at New York's Atlantic Studios on 16th of August 1968. Oh, that's an eerie date. That's the 9-year anniversary before Elvis's death. 16th of August 1968 with a vocal, and we kept the piano track. Went back to England and went into IBC Studios in London, where they did all their famous recordings in the 1960s. Added onto the piano track, and Barry's vocal stayed on as well. We had a choir and an orchestra all on this one piano. Cover versions of 1st of May number well over 100. I didn't know that. Wow. I think To Love Somebody is about 2,000 or 3,000. This one has 100. well, you know, it's not exactly a To Love Somebody, and yet it's still got a very high number of covers. With many high-profile artists among them, including, I've never heard of her, Patti Boulay, Jose Feliciano, yes, Roger Whittaker, Cilla Black, Frank Ifield, The Wolf Tones, Sarah Brightman, and Matt Monro. So they're just some of the names that did First of May. They're also one of the notable omissions from this album, but other compilations made up for it in the future. You could only buy it on single on the day, was Tomorrow, Tomorrow. What I love about it is that it sounds just like something out of Neil Diamond's songbook. It is just epic, but so not cheesy. It's dark, and it's got the choir, and it's got the mellotron, it's got this vibe like it's the end of the world. Apocalyptic vibe, which is life-affirming at the same time. And I don't think that's an easy thing to do. I think it's very easy to become like the Nile song by Pink Floyd. But to be life-affirming, I think that's a rare trait that only Neil Diamond and Bee Gees and very few others have. Maybe on occasion Rolling Stones have it too. And that's what I love about Tomorrow, Tomorrow. I really urge you to have a listen to that. Wow. On the same day, Robin announced he was leaving to pursue a solo career. Barry, Morris and Colin were in the studio laying down tracks for Tomorrow, Tomorrow and Sun in My Morning. That's the other brilliant song. Morris implied that Robin's exit had been foreseen when he said, as always, thinking ahead, this was the first track that Barry and I recorded as a duet. The first part of the new phase of the Bee Gees, where they're just a duo and Robin was going solo. Tomorrow, Tomorrow is a departure from the typical Bee Gees style the audience, oh you bet, the typical audience had been accustomed to. Morris said, I don't think it's us, but I quite like it. It's not surprising that it wasn't written to the usual formulas. It was originally composed with the intention of being given, oh my God, to Joe Cocker. I'm so glad he didn't do it. But Joe Cocker would have been a master of doing something like Tomorrow, Tomorrow, because he did with a little help from my friends, and you've got to admit, he did them a little bit better than the original Beatles version. A lot more soulful anyway. A lot more authentically rock and roll. It had the spirit of rock and roll, which the Beatles sort of looked over on that song and other songs on Sgt. Pepper. A little bit like a show tune almost. It's easy to imagine him singing it. Oh yeah, for sure. Now that you mention it, it is. Barry rushed to finish the song quickly, but it never reached Joe, whose management gave him Delta Lady instead. So it was a win-win for everyone, because I quite love Delta Lady being sung by Joe Cocker. So there you go. These are just some of the songs on this album. It was a real good chart success for them and has re-entered the charts subsequently, has even in reissue as we speak. Number 2 in France, number 4 in the United States, and number 10 in Australia. So this did pretty well and is in reissue as of 2022 on vinyl. So that is remarkable. I think it's the first time it's been reissued on vinyl since late 1980s. So that's really, really special. But it's been on CD, of course, many times. I love the simplicity of it, and you can't deny the history of this. It's the 60s, it's got the liner notes, so there's no pretenses here. You get the real thing here, and you get the songs that actually sold over 1 million copies each, with the exception of I Can't See Nobody. It's actually very generous of them to put it on this album. It's probably due to popular demand. The very fact that Nina Simone covered it and everyone loves that song. I think that is one of the examples where the Bee Gees were ahead of their time and could do something which really impacted white American rock, people like Tom Petty. So I'm really happy that they included this song here, which they didn't have to, and also Spicks and Specks, because that song would have been written off to the dustbins of history. Keep in mind that the Spicks and Specks album, the Australia-only album, remained an Australia-only album until about 2013 or something. So it was impossible to buy. Impossible to buy. You'd have to buy a bootleg or get an original vinyl from Australia, so you can imagine the cost. I remember the time when every Christian lighter-hearted man was not even talked about by Bee Gees fans. It was just one of these odd compositions of the Bee Gees that nobody really professed to liking or to knowing much about. And now in the age of the internet, People argue, was it taken from, was it inspired by the Beatles' Tomorrow Never Knows, or what were they trying to do, and are they cool or not? All these questions that 30 years ago just weren't even uttered. I'm really glad that the Bee Gees, it just shows how relevant they remain in 2020, 22 and 23, I'm sure, and beyond. I hope this album stays for a long time in print, because literally hundreds of compilations released by the Bee Gees around the world. But principal compilations that I'll be covering in this video series, even those, we're talking something like 7 to maybe a dozen compilations that are really important. This is the first one, so this makes it very historical. Other compilations are important for the inclusion of a rare song. Like part 2 of this compilation has My World on it, and it's the only 12-inch vinyl you could buy it on. So, yeah, this is the very first international compilation, Best of the Bee Gees. If you ever going to buy one, I've probably said this before, but I really mean it now. If you're ever going to buy one thing of the Bee Gees, if you're not a fan, but you need one disc just to tick it off, yeah, I've got the Bee Gees, this is the one to have. This is it. This is the stuff that made them big in the first place. This represents their heyday. For the Beatles, it was maybe, Hard Day's Night and For Sale, Beatles for Sale. This is their heyday. This is it. And enjoy it.